Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Learn to Love podcast, your guide to everything love, sex, intimacy, and relationships. Each week, your host, Zach Beach, interviews new experts on love, including couples therapists, relationship coaches, sex educators, and best-selling authors. Learn the best tips and cutting-edge wisdom to better love yourself, others, and the world. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Learn to Love podcast, everyone. I am your host, Zach Beach, and I'm here with the incredible meditation teacher, author, and leader, Spring Washam. Hello, Spring, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Zach. Yeah, it's good to be here with you.
Today, we are going to talk about cultivating a fierce heart. But before we get into that, let's learn a little bit more about Spring. For those that don't know, Spring Washam is a well-known meditation teacher, author, and visionary leader based in California and Peru. The author of A Fierce Heart, Finding Strength, Courage, and Wisdom in Any Moment, Spring is a pioneer in bringing mindfulness-based healing practices to diverse communities and is one of the founders and core teachers at the East Bay Meditation Center located in downtown Oakland, California. She is a member of the Teachers Council at Spirit Rock Meditation Center in Northern California and has practiced and studied Buddhist philosophy in both the Theravada and Tibetan schools of Buddhism for the last 20 years. She is also a shamanic practitioner and is the founder of Lotus Vine Journeys, an organization that blends indigenous healing practices with Buddhist wisdom. Spring's writing and teachings have appeared in many online journals and publications. She has been a guest on many popular podcast and radio shows, and she currently travels and teaches meditation retreats, workshops, and classes worldwide. Hello, Spring. How are you doing today?
Wow, that was a lot. That sounded pretty good.
It is a lot. You must be so busy.
Well, usually, I have a pretty full schedule. I certainly had my 2020 schedule so mapped out in January. It was just like, yes. Now it's all changed. And here we are in the present moment, June 23rd, 2020. I like to mark things almost like a time capsule these days.
Mm-hmm. It's true. It's sometimes hard to even you don't know what day of the week it is. You don't know what month.
Yeah, exactly.
There's so many less markers. So, Spring, I really love the work that you do in the world. I've frequented East Bay Meditation Center many times, and I love your presence, and you imbue so much light and happiness in your way of being. And I was surprised to read in your book about just how challenging your childhood was. You very vulnerably wrote about watching your parents get lost to addictions, your mother to food, and your father to drugs, money, and life on the street. And also how you yourself struggled with self-hatred and depression. So I'm so curious. I know, it's hard to answer, how you got to where you are today. But I just think about all the love and light that you imbue, and how did you get from point A to point B?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And honestly, I think the biggest thing that helped me in my life was meditation practice and finding a meditation practice in the midst of so much going on. I was very lucky at a young age. I fell into, first it was Paramahansa Yogananda, the autobiography of a yogi, the book, and so many people, like Steve Jobs gave that book out, I think it was some big event. He was giving that out as a book that inspired him, and others, millions of others. But I really do attribute it to learning how to meditate, because even at a young age, I always had this really deep sense like something is wrong with our minds. I would get why are people acting like this? Why is there so much pain? I was very observant as a child, very empathic, very aware of the adults and the behavior of adults around me. And I somehow knew it's like something is wrong with our thinking. Something is wrong with our minds. So that led me into really being curious about the mind, like this mind-body process and what happens, how we think and how we believe, and why are we so emotional. My learning about emotions became very important to me because everyone around me was so emotional, whether it was sorrow or rage or a mix of it all. So in some ways that led me very early on to studying psychology when I was a teenager. Then self-realization gave me the idea of meditation. And then when I found Buddhism quite by accident, I saw there was this map that really resonated with me about the mind and the heart and the emotions and awareness. And I was like, yes. And I applied the teachings directly. I always have this memory of my first retreat and how powerful that was, because it was the first time I started to work with my own mind and my own heart directly.
That's wonderful. And meditation, it's true, has an extreme potential to transform our minds and transform our hearts. And it's amazing that you had this keen awareness of looking at a world of sort of untamed minds or perhaps closed hearts and this sort of violence and aggression and ill will that harbors. Now, I know a lot of people, like when they start meditating for the first time, it's hard. It's hard to sit for even just a minute, 2 minutes with our own thoughts because of everything that comes up and all the conditioning that comes up as well. So I'm wondering, what were some of the initial challenges that you encountered and how did you get over them?
Yeah, I think that is this kind of restless mind everyone talks about. I really get it. It's we're always working with these two energies in our experience, sleepiness and restlessness. They're the two energies we have to balance when we embark on a meditative practice and we're learning and we're training the mind. I think one of the things is that in our culture, we want instant results. I think that's one problem. We're like, well, I took a meditation class this weekend. Why am I still restless? It's we have to really look at this as a lifestyle and that it's a long-term training that we're doing. And the more we invest in it, the more we understand how to work with ourselves. So it's always a challenge to come and sit down. One of the hardest things about our modern culture is the busyness. Even this time where we're not working technically in an office this is a really busy time for people. We fill in space. And so our culture is moving so fast and we're so busy that the idea of sitting in the present moment, it's hard for us to unplug. I think in ancient times, it was easier. There was no Wi-Fi. In Tibet, they walked for, a month to go talk to their teacher. Well, that's very meditative. By the time they got there, the questions were answered, right? It was more space to be present. So we're kind of trying to carve out the spaciousness. It's challenging, and how you begin is you just start with wherever you are, monkey mind, crazy mind, and you just start to try to work with doing longer and longer periods. It's acclimatizing to the present moment, and you just you learn by doing.
So I'm hearing you talk about meditation as a way to tame the mind, the restless mind, even cultivate a level of awakeness beyond the sleepiness and restlessness that someone might feel in meditation. And I'm wondering, where does the heart come in? Because you talk about love and compassion and forgiveness. And when we think about meditation, or many people think about meditation as almost a form of mental exercise, it's like a form of mental hygiene, perhaps, to clear the thoughts of the mind. But where does the heart come in? How does meditation open the heart?
Well, oftentimes in the West, it's taught like that because what we've done is we've kind of taken mindfulness out of its context, being this great tradition. So it comes through a tradition where there are many practices. The word mindfulness really rooted in the Buddhist tradition. But we've taken it out of context. We've pulled one quality off the map, right? And we said, everybody, this is what we need to cultivate. But we're forgetting that the real path of transformation, it comes with the whole lineage behind it. And so that's one of the challenges is this one quality. It's mindfulness, power mindfulness, the 5 mindfulnesses, and you see people applying it in their work and how to be more focused. And so sadly, it's gotten hijacked. And so the perception is that, okay, this is going to make me almost like some kind of pill that is going to make me hyper focus or make me feel happy, or, and we forget the whole path it's a basket of ingredients. You can't take one ingredient. If you take, you're taking one ingredient out, but it's a big one, right? You're not going to get the same cookie if you take out the chocolate chips out of it, right? It's going to be different. So our culture has done that with the meditation mindfulness world. So that's okay. So let's talk about how we work with the heart. When you are really practicing awareness, it's actually not about the mind in those moments. It's the opposite of that. Mostly we're caught up in our mind all day, right? We're thinking about the past. We're thinking about the future. We're like, oh no, oh my God, what am I doing? I got to call this person. Where's my Zoom link? We're just like all over, right? The mind's just like a waterfall, stress, worry, some happy moments for sure, laughter, then worry, then wondering what's going on CNN. Oh my God. We're kind of more like that. So the meditation is the idea of the meditation isn't to apply some kind of technique. It's actually just to begin to rest into stillness. It's like when one thought and story ends, right before the next one begins, the next there's a gap called now, here. And we're trying to learn how to live in that gap. Right? How to expand, like what is it like to press the pause button? And when you do that and you begin to feel your body, right? The first observation is, oh my God, I have a body, right? That's like, oh, wait, it's breathing. Wait, I feel my toes. I feel my neck. And what happens is when we start to really rest in the body, well, guess where the heart is? It's not in the mind, it's deep in the body. So the more present we become and the more we feel the body, the more we're going to be able to feel the heart, right? You can't do that if you're just living in the mind hour after hour. In fact, we get cut off when we're just living in the mental realm. We're not understanding that we're also, these bodies have tremendous information and wisdom and knowledge. So the more we learn to come into the body, which we do through meditation, through embodiment practices, the much closer you are to accessing your heart, right? To feeling your heart. This is a feeling path. This is not mental gymnastics, and it's hijacked. It's appropriated right now. And so there's confusion around it, which is okay. That's how things happen in the West. We just go with that. So I hope that kind of answers a little bit, and that's a deeper reflection that, we can definitely go in that direction and talk more about.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that distinction that the real path of transformation is taught with a whole lineage behind it.
Yes.
And I also just love that metaphor that basically in between each thought, there is a gap and we're learning to live in that gap. And in that gap, we come into our bodies and we come into our hearts. So what does it mean when we talk about a fierce heart? Moving on to kind of the subject of your book. So if the stillness is the realm of the heart and the heart is deep in the body, once we get in touch with that stillness and heart, what do we want to do, or what can we do to make it fierce? What does that mean?
Well, I think that when I was working on the book and I started thinking about the stories of my own life and thinking about the people around me, being at the East Bay Meditation Center in downtown Oakland. And much of what I did, as a teacher was tell stories and listen to stories of freedom, stories of families, stories of personal tragedy and triumph and love. And I started to recognize the people, myself and others. And I say the word fierce is this quality of being able to hold this complexity of the human experience. Here we are, in the midst of this physical coronavirus epidemic and health. And then we have a civil rights movement happening. And we have the political structures. And we're watching videos of people murdered on TV right now and shot and all this injustice. It's like, how does the heart hold that? And I think when I think of someone who has a fierce heart, I think of Dalai Lama, I think of Dr. Martin Luther King, I think of Harriet Tubman. It's like we hold the truth of life And then we don't turn away from it. And there's a fierceness to the heart. It's not just Unicorn Island, it's like, whoa, this is some really important thing. There's a lot of suffering. And so the heart to me that's fierce is the heart that's able to hold the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows of this human life with dignity and love. And that's fierce, So that was the energy that I was trying to get. It's not just that we're going to sit still on the cushion. We may, but then at some point the body moves from that space and it moves into action. And sometimes it moves with a fierceness of standing up or being like, this is unjust. No, it's like the fist just rises up. We put ourselves on the line of something. That's fierce to me.
That's so fierce. And the courage it takes not to turn away from things. And you talk about all the ways that sort of manifest in our lives, including you mentioned forgiving everyone for everything. Also, even coming to love the people that might hate us or to love the people that might hate a certain group that we identify with. And you mentioned the police brutality, you mentioned the pandemic that we are in. Before we go to almost sort of a global compassion, I wouldn't mind just staying in the realm of the individual, because when you talk about forgiving everyone for everything, I'm wondering how that might play out in your own life, in your own circumstances.
Yeah, and even to say that statement, I forgive everyone for everything. It's like, that's an aspiration. It's like for me, I wrote that a couple of years ago and I printed that. And it's like, that's the trajectory of the heart, like this is where I'm trying to get to, everybody. And it's not easy, and I look and see what's going on. And I see, as a Black woman, I'm the object of all this energy in the community. And, and I have 4 brothers that are Black, and it's like, man, this really hurts. This is personal, kind of like that. And then I watch my mind. Well, do you forgive everybody for everything? And some days that answer is yes. And some days I'm really sad, and I just know that I'm inclining my mind toward that, because I do believe that that is the highest path. And forgiving everyone doesn't mean I don't act, stand up, speak my truth. It just means that I'm getting the arrow out of my heart. It's like, I can't function like that. I can't function if I'm rooted in hatred. It just hurts me too much. So that's my aspiration. And I want to say for our listeners, it's brutally hard at moments. Many people are not there, but they do understand, like, the goal is to let go and to be a force of good. We all know this on an intellectual level, but we got work to do with forgiving each other. And I have work to do with forgiving people, always in my own family. My own parents, hurt me deeply in many ways, unconsciously, of course. But I have really forgiven them. I continue to forgive them, for all of their delusions, and I trust that they are helping me forge a deeper fierceness. You got to practice, right? You need people to work on. These are qualities that you forge in relationship, right? In families. You got to have some challenges to grow. And so I've had those challenges and I still continue to have them. And I'm sure I'll have them to my last breath on this planet,
I just love your way of sort of just honoring the aspects of the human experience, like saying that it makes you sad, saying that these are aspirations and that these are directions we're trying to go. But of course, being human, we all have certain obstacles around it. And it's just so very rooted in your truth. So you mentioned being a Black woman in this world. You mentioned having 4 brothers that are Black, and also mentioned the fierce heart and able to hold all the challenges that this entails. So I'm wondering, how does one love the people in this world, the systems in this world that go against your way of life, that don't honor who you are as a human being? And I'm wondering, how do you deal with the anger of systemic oppression? How do you even cope with something like the fear of, one of your brothers going out, not knowing 100% if they're going to be coming home? When you talk about embracing the 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows, how do we embrace the fear, the anger, the hatred that we see from other people?
Yeah, well, this is where I rely a lot on my Dharma training and years of studying core teachings and studying them in a way that I know that they're true. For me, the journey of awakening from my understanding of the Buddhist core teaching is that, we're on this path of purification, that this is a whole journey from ignorance to wisdom, right? And the ignorance is what we're seeing, isn't it? And it's rooted in greed, it's rooted in hatred, and it's rooted in delusion. And as a young practitioner, I was always studying those three qualities, because the Buddha talked about when the mind is pure of greed, pure of hatred, and pure of delusion, it expresses natural qualities and it's attained nibbana, right? So that's the end of the confusion. And so for me, that was the movement of my life, is like uprooting these out of the mind stream. And so when I look around and I see people who are maybe killing others or in a hate group or, promoting violence against innocent people, it's like, oh, right. What I'm hating is the greed, hatred, and delusion. What I'm upset, not hating, but what it's not them. It's that mind state. Jesus kind of said the same thing, hate the sin, not the sinner, or something. I don't know why that came to me right now, but I've been thinking a lot about biblical references lately, the Bible. What does the Bible say about all this? Love thy brother. We're looking for everything to hold on to right now. So I really look at the systems of oppression also are the consciousness of greed, the consciousness of hatred, the consciousness of delusion. And so as we see, for me, as we start to question the systems, or like even the police, like we're paying for this. My tax dollars go to the police department and fire department. It's like, so I'm funding them. So when we say defund, what a radical idea it's not like, we want to just like, yes, do you know all of our tax dollars are supporting this? So like, wow, what are we supporting? Or, it's just to look at that in a deeper way. Like, what are these systems based on? And can we start to wake up for the systems that are really rooted in hatred and start to transform them? So I try to look at it like that. And how can I then, okay, if this is greed, hatred, and delusion, well, what wakes that up? Wisdom and compassion. Like, what can I do to be an antidote, right? Because regardless, I don't want these energies to stay confused. The idea is like, hey, can we have a dialogue? Can we talk about this? Like, is there a place to talk about this? Can we come together in some way? So I think the healing of our nation is going to be with the people sitting down and breaking bread together and sharing stories. It just has to come from the heart. We can try to enact all these laws and they won't mean anything until the heart's in it. The heart is the real system. It's what creates justice. It can't just be passing a lot of new laws. That is good. That may protect lives. But what we're really looking at is a shift in consciousness. Isn't that what we want? A shift in the heart.
I really appreciate that, returning to the Dharma, or just returning to the spiritual teachings that do talk about this universal love, this universal compassion, to start with ourselves, to look at our own hearts and minds, how we're cultivating, or how we also have, harbor inside of us the potential for hatred and delusion. You even mentioned Jesus is the same way, thinking about this idea that we have Christ consciousness or Christ nature inside of us, along with our Buddha nature. And you also mentioned that in your book about this idea of Buddha nature. And you're talking about once we dispel the greed, hatred, and delusion, then we find this upwelling of the natural qualities of love and compassion and wisdom. And let's talk more about how to sort of get in touch with this Buddha nature. We often hear something along the lines of like, who you are is natural awareness and radiance and compassion, but that's not our day-to-day experience. Well, at least, not
most people, yeah, it's not, yeah.
So when you say, oh, these are our love and compassion, our natural qualities we can get in touch with at any moment, we often don't feel that way. So how do we get in touch with this core of our being?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of the things that really inspired me when I was young, when I first got into the Buddhist path, it was like, okay, you're all awakened, but you just forgot. I found that to be so hopeful, actually. It was such an optimistic way, like, right, I have forgotten, because we can really relate to that forgetting who we really are. That's really it. We have these moments of brilliance, right? Our hearts are open, where maybe it's like while you're making love, or maybe it's while you're watching a sunset, or you're having some profound moment and you just see your interconnectedness. You see this beauty in yourself, right? It might just be a second. That's okay. A second, but it's like it's there. Right? It's there. And a lot of times people tap into their Buddha nature more when they are leaving meditation retreats. They spent days, and they start to enter into this state of sublime, where they feel compassion. They just feel love for their brothers and their sisters. And it comes from living in that gap, Zach, that gap of here and now. Where the stories, we press the pause button and we're just resting. There's something in that gap between stories. The more we rest in it, it's like the more the ignorance dissolves. It's the ignorance of separation. It's the ignorance of fear of our brothers and sisters. What's so sad about the racism is like, people go and they maybe shoot a Black man. They're shooting themselves in that moment. To think that you don't ever get away with anything. Everything is lawful, right? What you do to me is done unto you, and it's just, I take a lot of refuge in that too. What you do to someone, you do to yourself. When you speak about someone, you're speaking about yourself. And so I'm very passionate to share that with people. And so I try to remind people all the time, even when I was at East Bay Meditation Center, and I can't even tell you how many Dharma talks I used to give there. Thursday night Sangha was for communities of color. I gave so many talks there over the last decade. But I always used to tell people, what I'm saying is not new. You know this already. I am reminding you right now. So you might give me credit, but don't give me the credit. It's you. I'm helping you to remember your true nature, right? And so the big thing is remembering. And the second thing is taking time to remember. So you can look at your spiritual practice not as another grim duty on the to-do list. Oh no, I have to sit for 20 minutes and try to do mindfulness. Don't look at it like that, because then that becomes like, oh no, I've got to work out. No, I've got to call my mom. It becomes a drag. But instead, it's like your time to remember your true nature. It's like, yeah, we have to remember, because it gets obscured. Our goodness gets obscured, and we start acting in ways that are counterproductive to our deepest intention.
Now, when you're talking about clearing the gap, I'm imagining, or living in the gap, I'm imagining like the clouds parting, like the clouds of, say, hatred and greed and delusion, and then a light begins to appear, and that state of sublimity, that light is who we are, although we might identify with the clouds. And it's so inspiring just hearing from you that what we do to others, we do to ourselves, because we're all connected. And it is something to remember, but it's something so many people quite clearly have forgotten.
Right. Yeah, that's part of the ignorance, right? That we see so much separation. We think that we can say cruel and hateful things and there's no consequences to it, because it appears that it's insignificant in the moment. But everything's spoken to another. It's like, this is also the law of cause and effect in the Buddhist tradition that and it's not that you want somebody to be harmed for their actions, is that they will be by their actions. It's law. Every time we speak or we act, we put a seed in the ground. And are we sowing seeds of love? Are we sowing seeds of hatred? And sadly, there's so much seeds of sorrow being sown right now, right? Just people acting in ways that are just killing, harming, inciting killing and harming of other beings. And so it's something for all of us to watch and to learn from. And this is a collective experience that what the whole world is going through right now. Everybody's observing this. Everyone's talking about this. And what I think is there's something I want to mention specifically, like as spiritual practitioners, of people who are lovers of truth, and we want to wake up and we want to open our heart and we want to live fiercely. You want to be looking at the internalized oppression and the stories that are alive in you. You want to catch them. You want to catch any area where it could be white supremacy because we're swimming in it, right? And it's painful, but we want to interrupt the narrative, right? We want to see the program. And one of the ways that you can do that is just what's so genius, I think, to catching the program is the 3 words, Black Lives Matter. To even say it interrupts the programming because there's so many people that can't, that even see the word written, they go into rage, right? Just the 3 words are kind of genius. They're like a koan. They catch the program, right? Yeah. They interrupt it. You know, it's like, oh, I'm so woke. And then we try to say the words and it's like, isn't that interesting? Be curious about that. Be really curious about that because we want to take these arrows out of our heart and some are so deep and it's not our fault. It's the culture. It's the programming. So I want to encourage your listeners to be willing to look deeper and just be curious and compassionate about what you discover.
It's so true. Like Black Lives Matter is like inputting code into the system. And like, for so many people, this error comes out. I'm like, it blows my mind. Yeah. Like people say, the way people say, yeah, but all lives are blue lives. Yep. And it's like, these are people that need our help right now.
And it is so funny. There was an interview I saw somebody where Mike Pence, the vice president, was being interviewed by some Black pastors. And they asked him on 3 or 4 occasions to say it. And it was like this look of just like, it's like, yeah, it interrupts the code. It's like a program and it's so interesting how these 3 words can cause so much in our culture right now. I mean, people are just enraged over it, and then it's like, I just love it. There's something about that's genius. Anyway, yeah.
I want to return to something you mentioned earlier and kind of combine it with this idea of compassion that we're talking about right now, because you mentioned how there are so many seeds of sorrow being sown right now. And it's true. It seems every time we turn on the news, first of all, there's the pandemic with millions of people getting sick and hundreds of thousands of people around the world dying. And then we flip the channel and we see another shocking and heartbreaking video of an unarmed person of color being shot or brutalized by the police. And also, I think a lot of white people in particular are almost being awakened to the suffering that has been happening for centuries, being completely unaware of it. So there's pain and there's suffering. And you talk about meeting or being able to meet this with compassion. And in your book, you actually talk about compassion as the great chief. And I was wondering if you could tell our listeners a little bit more about this great chief and why you use this term.
Yeah. I called it the great chief because I was on this retreat one time up in Colorado. I did a solo retreat by myself. First, I was in a small center in Crestone, Colorado for 2 months, a little Tibetan center, practicing with a small group. And then I went up to this cabin way up in the wild, it was like, had a little solar panel in a cabin. And I thought, this is going to be so magical. I'll be alone. And it ended up being one of the most challenging, unbelievably challenging, emotional time I ever had alone in this cabin for a few months practicing. And it was during that time where this grief just came. It was just oceans of tears that it would pour out of my eyes. Literally, it would just like pour like faucets, whole towels. I remember having this giant towel. It would be like wet, of just tears and tears and tears. And it would go on in the morning and on at night. And then at night, when it would get dark, I would go into these terrors of being killed and murdered, and I'd be alone and in this cabin. And I would just like, I just shook all night. So it was like oceans of tears all day and then shaking and terror all night. And after about a month, I thought, something is happening to me. Something so deep is unwinding, but I don't know if I have the sanity to do this, to be present with this. I think I need help. And so I started to pray to compassion. And I had only books I had no computer, no phone, nothing. I only had a stack of Dharma books that were really intense. They were like The Nature of Mind, volume 1 to 10. They were like, but I had this book on compassion by the Dalai Lama. And I was like, I would read it. And I just started praying. I said, I have to be able to get through this. And if I don't have care, if I can't care about this pain, then I'll never survive. If I try to push it away, it'll drive me crazy. I can't resist it. I've tried. It was just pouring out. It was like, waking up and the heart just wham, oceans falling, tears, more tears. So I started to pray to compassion every day and Kuan Yin and Mother Mary. And I started to think about all the people around the world who were in retreats. And I saw this as a great purification. But I prayed for compassion. And then one day it started to show up. Like this deep compassion. And then I was able to be with my own pain in a way that was bearable because I just kept evoking this deep sense of love for myself that I was experiencing so much hurt, and letting it go. It was like unwinding something out of my DNA, and I think it had been waiting years to unwind this kind of terror out of my system because at that time, I was living in East Oakland, which was way scarier than this cabin in Colorado. So my fear certainly, I was on the 500 acres of the Dzogchen community protected, but it didn't matter when the mind is gripped and something very deep is releasing. You're on a train and you have no control. You just pray. All you can do is just pray to stay alive in those moments. And I did because the chief came. And so I started bowing to compassion. I was doing a lot of prostrations on that retreat too, to the Tibetan practices. So I just every day started doing like hundreds of prostrations, bowing to the Buddha of compassion. Yeah. So it was very beautiful. And that was a life-changing experience because fundamentally I understood compassion on a completely different level. And then I began to understand why in Tibetan Buddhism, the quality is so cherished. I go, this is why, because if you're really going to let go of the egoic karma and really let go, you need compassion to even heal your own trauma. You can't let go without compassion. You'll hold on forever. It's the compassion that actually lets go of our pain. It stops clinging, right? It starts to see where it's hurting us. We start letting go of our hate because we see the pain it inflicts. It's compassion that says, honey, put down the rocks, And so I learned so much. So that chapter is really dedicated to that time. And as I call compassion the great chief because it was like without the chief of all qualities of the heart, I wouldn't have survived it. So it was beautiful in that way. So yes, compassion is why I live, why I do what I do.
That's so beautiful. We can't let go without compassion.
No, it's impossible.
Your story, it's incredible. And it reminds me of that phrase, no mud, no lotus, that a month of tears and shaking that turned into an incredible moment of awakening.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I remember I used to be crying really loud and it would turn into like a gospel song, and I would see that was the compassion. Even in the singing, it reminded me of like the songs of my people, like, oh, right. They sung and, people out on plantations, they would sing to keep their hearts going, And so we have that. We sing, we chant, we want to be on the side of the good here. This is why we live. We use this time, don't waste it. Use it for freedom, standing up and doing stuff like your conversations, creating dialogues, creating opportunities for people to share their stories is so important right now.
Yeah, let's talk about the Sangha, because we've talked about the first two refuges. We've talked about the Buddha and the Buddha nature, and we've talked about the Dharma and being rooted in truth. So let's talk about the role of the Sangha, because you mentioned how we all need to sit at the table and break bread, and we can sing together and share our stories together. So how do we find that Sangha in our lives? How do we cultivate the community of like-minded spiritual practitioners to support each other's growth and healing?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. It's like, this is all in some way about building family and community. It's so interesting because there's this famous quote where in the Pali Canon where the Buddha's cousin, Ananda, who was his attendant for 35 years of his life, was his attendant. And he asked the Buddha, he says, "So, Blessed One, it seems that spiritual friends are half of the holy life." And then they said the Buddha corrected him and he said, "No, Ananda, spiritual friends are the whole of the holy life." Right? And so there's this idea that who you have around you, it brings us power. There's power in numbers. There's power in bringing people together for the good, so we gather with our friends who are inspiring us to grow and to do more and to practice. Our sanghas uplift one another. My understanding of this aspect has been so much more lived in the last few years. Like, oh man, without my spiritual friends, I couldn't live this life the way I do. When I fall down, they pick me up, and remind me, dust me off. I'm like, oh, right. And when they fall down, I pick them up. Right. And it's this picking up each other that makes the whole march happen. Like, let's keep on walking, keep on going here, So who you have around you, and for people who are maybe living in remote places or feel like, oh no, I have no one to connect to, I'm alone in my house right now, pray about it and you will start attracting friends. Maybe online, you joining groups, or you're going, somewhere in your community, or you'll start to attract it when it becomes important to you. They'll start to show up. So don't give up hope. Even in small towns, there's flowers blooming in the weeds, So you just look for them and you'll attract that. So, but yeah, having a spiritual community, especially right now, is just so important.
There are flowers blooming in the weeds, so find your flowers. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, and they're there. Don't just look at the weeds. It's easy to do. That's what we always do.
So thank you so much for coming on the show, Spring. I could just listen to your talk of wisdom and truth and forgiveness and compassion forever. But we are running out of time, so I want to just finish with asking you a question I love to ask all of my guests, which is quite simply, what do you wish everyone knew about love?
I think I just wish everyone knew how really, when we tap into the unconditional aspect of it, how powerful it really is. In relationship, it's one level, but when it's turned kind of to all beings, like humanity, like all beings, and like this force, that I think that just to believe that it's a force that is guiding us. It's soul force. It's universal force. It's called literally the force in Star Wars, that we're learning about it, to start to trust that it's not just kind of hippie talk, like to believe in love, that actually there's something that Dr. King understood about it, right? And these great revolutionaries, they acted in the name of love, right? For all of us, whether they were hated or not, they were moving in that direction. So let's try as a community to start to widen our definition and tap into this power that's bigger than maybe anything we've known. I feel like I'm a kindergartner in it. Like I just got Yeah, kindergartner for sure. And maybe next year I'll get to the first grade, and try to understand, what is this force? How is it moving through our lives when we attune to it? It can be a guiding light. It can move mountains. It can create pathways through rocks maybe we didn't even know was there. And so just this unconditional part turned toward humanity. Very powerful.
Yeah, remember the power of unconditional love. So many things to remember today. Remember our true nature. Remember compassion.
It's a lot of remembering, and we are doing that. We're back in time, aren't we? We're going back in time right now, and we have to remember. We're remembering history right now. We're looking at Confederate flags right now. We are back in time. We're retrograde. This means we're going back in our lives. People are dealing with things they thought were done. It's about remembering so that we can move forward, not hanging on to it, but learning and then moving forward. So remembering your Buddha nature if you forgot today. I hope this conversation reminds you of your mission and your true heart.
Yes.
Yes. Hallelujah.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. So Spring Washam, springwasham.com, eastbaymeditationcenter.org. Are there any offerings or anything you want our listeners to know about what you're up to right now?
Well, people can join on depending on when this airs. I'm doing this amazing class called The Dharma of Harriet Tubman. And so for those who are interested, you can just go on my website and see about that event, or check out me anywhere on social media. And the class is going on till mid-July. So depending on when this goes out, join my Harriet class. It's epic. So good.
Dharma. Awesome. I'll take it. Dharma of Harriet Tubman.
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you so much again, Spring, for coming on to the show, for sharing your wisdom. And thank you, listeners, for listening to the show. We hope you remember so many things. We hope you remember that the real path of transformation is taught with a whole lineage behind it. We hope you remember your fierce heart and the quality of being able to hold on to the complexity of human experience. We hope you remember your true loving nature, and whatever you do, don't forget the power of unconditional love. Thanks again for listening. If you would like to learn more about me, you can go to zachbeach.com and learn more about the show at theheartcenter.com. Thanks again, Spring.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to the Learn to Love podcast. To learn more about the show and your host, head over to zachbeach.com or theheartcenter.com. You can also follow Zach on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.